Christmas dinner usually meant safety and warmth, but this year it felt like an ambush. My family had an invoice for my success, and I was the main course. The smell of roasted pine needles and my dad's famous honey-glazed ham filled the air, a scent that used to mean safety, warmth, and Christmas. This year, it just felt like the preamble to an ambush. I'd been on edge since I walked through the door of my parents' house. It wasn't just the usual holiday stress. It was the way everyone's eyes followed me, the way their smiles seemed a little too wide, a little too predatory. I'd had a good year, a very good year. After nearly a decade of pouring every cent I had and every waking hour into my custom woodworking business, it had finally exploded. A feature in a major design magazine, a couple of celebrity clients, and suddenly I wasn't just the weird cousin who played with sawdust. I was the successful entrepreneur. The family's attitude towards me had shifted so fast it gave me whiplash. The same people who'd called my business a cute little hobby were now asking for investment advice. I'd just closed on my first house, a modest but beautiful place with a huge workshop space that was all mine. I was proud. For the first time in my 32 years, I felt financially secure, stable. I'd brought generous, thoughtful gifts for everyone, from a top-of-the-line espresso machine for my parents to a new laptop for my niece. I thought that would be enough. I should have known better. My older sister Clara cornered me by the fireplace while I was nursing a glass of eggnog. She had that saccharine sweet smile on her face, the one she always used right before she was about to ask for something she knew she had no right to. "Annie, darling," she cooed, smoothing down the front of her designer dress, a dress I suspected she couldn't actually afford. "You look so prosperous. That new house must be amazing." "It's nice," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "The workshop is the best part." "Of course. Always the workhorse," she tittered, as if my dedication was a quaint little character flaw. She then slipped a crisp white envelope from the sleeve of her dress. It wasn't a Christmas card. It was a business envelope, stark and official against the festive backdrop of blinking lights and tinsel. "Here," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is from Mom." I took it, a cold knot forming in my stomach. My mom was sitting across the room, studiously avoiding my gaze as she chatted with my aunt. If it was from her, why wasn't she giving it to me herself? Clara patted my arm, her manicured nails digging in just a little. "My dear, here's a list from Mom of who you're supposed to give money to for New Year." I stared at her, then at the envelope. I must have misheard. What?" "A list," she repeated, enunciating the word as if I were a simpleton. "Just a little guide. Mom knows you've been so busy with your little business, she didn't want you to forget anyone. You know, for New Year's gifts. Monetary ones. It's just easier that way for everyone." My blood started to run cold. I could feel the eyes of the room on us now, a subtle shift in attention. This was a coordinated effort. I tore open the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was not a handwritten note on Mom's flowery stationery. It was a single sheet of printer paper, folded neatly in three. It was typed. A typed, itemized list of names and dollar amounts. My eyes scanned the page, and the cold knot in my stomach turned into a block of ice. Cousin Jeremy, $20,500 for his innovative new app idea. Jeremy hadn't had a job in 5 years, and his last app idea was a service that would tell you which public restrooms were cleanest. Aunt Carol, $5,000 towards her medical expenses. Aunt Carol's only medical expenses were the Botox and fillers she got every 6 months. She'd bragged about it at Thanksgiving. Uncle Robert, $3,000 to help with his credit card debt. Uncle Robert's credit card debt was from a 3-week trip to Vegas he'd taken in October. The list went on. Nieces, nephews, cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. Each name was followed by a 4-figure number and a flimsy, almost insulting justification. It felt like I was reading a mob ledger, a list of tribute payments I was expected to make to secure my place in the family. Then I got to the bottom. Clara, $15,000, down payment for a new, safer car for the baby. Clara wasn't pregnant. She didn't even have a boyfriend. The car she drove was a 3-year-old SUV in perfect condition. I felt a wave of nausea. $15,000. She was demanding $15,000, and right below her name, the final entry. Mom and Dad, $20,000 for home renovations, new sunroom. The grand total at the bottom of the page was a staggering $58,500. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't a gift list. This was an invoice for being successful. They had sat down, all of them, and decided how to carve up my hard-earned money. They'd typed it up like a business proposal, stripping it of all emotion, all pretense of family or love, and boiled it down to a cold, hard transaction. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. I slowly lifted my eyes from the paper. The hum of conversation in the room had died down. Everyone was watching me. My father, my aunts, my uncles. They all had the same look on their faces, a greedy, expectant gleam. Clara stood beside me, a smug little smile playing on her lips, as if she'd just checkmated me in a game I didn't even know I was playing. My gaze finally found my mother across the room. She was looking right at me now, her expression a careful practice mask of maternal concern. She gave a tiny, encouraging nod, as if to say, "Go on, dear. Do the right thing." The festive music from the stereo suddenly sounded mocking. The twinkling lights felt like they were burning holes in my vision. I folded the paper with deliberate, sharp creases, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. I held it in my hand, the list of demands feeling heavier than a brick of gold. I took a deep breath, letting the anger settle into a cold, hard point in my chest. I looked past Clara, past everyone, and locked eyes with my mother. In a voice that was quiet, but carried across the entire room, I asked a single, simple question. "Mom, did you type this?" My mother's face, which had been a carefully constructed mask of innocence, flickered. Just for a second, a hint of annoyance crossed her features before she smoothed it over with a pained smile. She didn't answer me directly. Instead, she looked at my sister. "Clara, dear, I told you a handwritten note would have been warmer," she said, her voice dripping with faux regret. "Your sister thinks we're being impersonal. It was a classic move. Deflect, reframe, and make me the bad guy for pointing out the absurdity of the situation." The entire room took her cue. "Oh, Annie, don't be like that," Aunt Carol chimed in, waving a dismissive hand adorned with several gaudy rings. "Your mother's heart was in the right place. We all know how focused you get. She was just trying to help you remember everyone." "Remember," I echoed, my voice dangerously low. I held up the typed sheet. "This isn't a reminder, Aunt Carol. This is a price list. $2,500 for Jeremy's app, $5,000 for your medical expenses. Is that before or after the deductible on your new cheek fillers?" A gasp went through the room. Aunt Carol's face turned a shade of mottled red that clashed horribly with her Christmas sweater. "Well, I never." "No, you always," I shot back, my patience shredded. "And you, Uncle Robert, $3,000 for credit card debt? How was Vegas? Did you win big before you decided I should cover your losses?" Uncle Robert, who had been trying to look invisible, sputtered, "Now see here, that's none of your business." "It is when you're sticking your hand in my pocket for $3,000. "Annie, that is enough." My father's voice boomed from his armchair the first time he'd spoken. He didn't sound angry, just deeply, profoundly disappointed. It was a weapon he'd honed over years of parenting, and it usually worked. "You are embarrassing your mother and yourself. We are your family. When one of us is blessed with good fortune, it's a blessing for all of us. We share." "Share?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "This isn't sharing. This is a shakedown. And what about you, Clara?" I turned to my sister, who was now trying to look wounded and fragile. $15,000 for a new car? For the baby? What baby, Clara? Last I heard, you were complaining about being single. Did you meet someone, fall in love, and get pregnant in the last 3 weeks since we last spoke?" Clara's eyes welled up with crocodile tears. "I was going to tell everyone tonight," she sobbed, clutching her perfectly flat stomach. "It was supposed to be a surprise, but you've ruined it. You've just ruined my special announcement with your money." The performance was so audacious, so utterly shameless, that for a moment I was speechless. She was willing to invent a fictional pregnancy, right here on the spot, for a chance at $15,000. The room immediately filled with murmurs of sympathy for her. My aunt started to coo and move toward her. I had become the villain, the cold, heartless sister who cared more about money than her family's fictional happiness. "You're lying," I said, the words coming out as cold as ice. "There is no baby." "How can you be so cruel?" my mother whispered, shaking her head as if I were a monster she didn't recognize. "To your own sister." "Because I know her," I said, my voice rising. "Because I know all of you. You've been watching me, circling like vultures, waiting for the moment you could swoop in and pick my bones clean. This whole year, it hasn't been, 'Congratulations, Annie.' It's been, 'How much can we get from Annie?'" I looked from face to greedy face. The expectant smiles were gone, replaced with masks of outrage and indignation. They genuinely couldn't see what they were doing wrong. In their minds, my success belonged to them. I was just the temporary guardian of their windfall. "We supported you," my father said, standing up. He was a big man, and he used his height to command the room. "When you were wasting your time in that dusty garage, smelling of wood varnish and failure, who encouraged you?" I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Encouraged me? You told me to get a real job every week for 5 years. You called my workshop my expensive hobby, and told Mom I'd be living in her basement forever. A flicker of something, maybe shame, maybe just anger at being called out, crossed his face. We were motivating you, using reverse psychology. We always knew you had it in you. We just had to push you." The sheer, staggering delusion of it all was making me dizzy. They had retroactively rewritten history to make themselves the architects of my success. My years of 80-hour work weeks, of living on ramen noodles, of risking everything I had, none of that mattered. In their new narrative, they were the masterminds who had guided me to this point. I crumpled the list in my fist, the paper crackling in protest. "No," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it felt like it could split the earth. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to take credit for my work. This money is mine. I earned it. Every single penny. And you are not entitled to any of it." I threw the crumpled ball of paper onto the coffee table. "There will be no New Year's payments. The gifts I brought are under the tree. Take them or leave them. But this extortion ends now. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my ears. I could feel their collective glare burning into my back. I just needed to get out, to breathe air that wasn't thick with entitlement and greed. "You're forgetting something, Annie," my father said, his voice stopping me dead in my tracks. It was calm, steady, and utterly chilling. I turned back to face him. His expression was no longer disappointed. It was cold, hard, and calculating. He looked at me not like a daughter, but like a business deal gone sour. "We gave you the $5,000 to buy that first big sander you wanted," he said slowly. "All those years ago. Don't you remember? We gave you the seed money to start that little business in the first place." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. "We're not asking for a gift, Annie. We're collecting on our investment." The air in the room thickened, becoming heavy and suffocating. My father's words echoed in the sudden, complete silence. Collecting on our investment. He said it with such authority, such conviction, as if he were a venture capitalist calling in a loan, not a father talking to his daughter. The faces around me shifted from indignant outrage to smug vindication. Of course, this wasn't a handout. It was a return. It made perfect sense in their twisted logic. I stared at my dad, trying to reconcile the man who taught me how to ride a bike with this stranger who was now claiming ownership of my success. The $5,000. I remembered it vividly. I was 24, working 2 dead-end jobs to save up for a professional-grade drum sander, a piece of equipment that would quadruple my efficiency. I was still short, and I was burning out fast. I'd mentioned it to my mom in passing, complaining about how long it would take me to save the rest. A week later, my parents sat me down. My father slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $5,000. I burst into tears. I tried to refuse, to say I'd pay them back with interest, but they wouldn't hear of it. "It's a gift, sweetheart," my mother had said, stroking my hair. "We believe in you. Just consider it an early inheritance, a little boost to get you started." My father had nodded in agreement. "Don't worry about paying it back. Just make us proud." "A gift," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You said it was a gift, an early inheritance." "Circumstances change, Annie," my father replied, his tone dismissive. "We saw it as an investment in a family asset. That asset is now mature. It's time for it to pay dividends to the shareholders." "Shareholders?" I sputtered, looking around the room at the greedy faces. "You think Aunt Carol's Botox injections are a dividend on my hard work? You think a down payment on a fantasy car for my lying sister is a legitimate business expense? It's not for you to decide how the shareholders spend their returns," my father said, his voice hardening. "You just manage the asset. We determine the distribution of profits." I felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality, a bizarre corporate parody of a family Christmas. They had rationalized their greed into a business model where I was the primary product. The years of doubt, the dismissive comments, the subtle undermining all of it, had been erased from their memory, replaced by this heroic narrative of themselves as savvy investors who were now, rightfully, cashing in. "This is insane," I said, shaking my head. "Absolutely insane. There was no contract. There were no terms.
You gave me a gift. You cannot retroactively turn a gift into a loan, let alone an equity stake in my entire life's work." "There's a document," Clara said, her voice sharp and triumphant. The tears were gone, replaced by a venomous smirk. She'd clearly been waiting for this moment. Mom found it.
My mother scurried over to the antique writing desk in the corner of the room, her movements bird-like and nervous. She fumbled with a drawer before pulling out a yellowed piece of paper. She wouldn't look at me as she handed it to my father. He took it and held it up like a trophy. "Your mother had you sign this when you accepted the check. A formality, really. Just a little something for our records." He walked over and held the paper out to me. My hands shook as I took it. It was a single page, typed on an old typewriter, the letters slightly uneven. The heading at the top read, "Family Loan and Investment Agreement." My blood ran cold. I scanned the dense paragraph of legalese. It was full of convoluted phrases about initial seed capital, proportional profit sharing, and familial obligation. It was a masterpiece of amateur legal trickery, designed to look official to a desperate 24-year-old. It stipulated that the $5,000 was an investment granting the investors, my parents, the right to claim a reasonable and periodic share of future profits, with the definition of reasonable to be determined at their sole discretion. And there, at the bottom, was my signature. I stared at it, a faint, looping scroll I barely recognized. I remembered that day. I'd been so emotional, so overwhelmed with gratitude, that I would have signed anything they put in front of me without reading it. I'd seen the words loan agreement at the top, and when I questioned it, my mom had waved her hand and said, "Oh, that's just what the template said. Your father just wants a record that he gave you the money for accounting. Don't worry about the details, sweetie. It's a gift." They had tricked me. 8 years ago, they had laid this trap, banking on my future success. They hadn't been motivating me with reverse psychology. They hadn't been encouraging me at all. They had been waiting for the moment the investment they'd made in their gullible, ambitious daughter would finally pay off. "You lied to me," I whispered, looking at my mother. "You told me it was a gift, but you had me sign this." She flinched, twisting the strap of her purse in her hands. "We just wanted to protect ourselves, Annie. What if you'd taken the money and just wasted it? It was a lot of money for us back then." "So this has been the plan all along?" I asked, my voice hollow. "To wait until I finally made something of myself and then spring this trap? To hold this over my head and bleed me dry for the rest of my life?" "Don't be so dramatic," my father scoffed. "We're asking for less than $60,000. From what we hear about your new clients, that's a drop in the bucket for you. It's a reasonable return for our initial risk." I looked at the crumpled list on the table, then back at the sham contract in my hand. I felt trapped, cornered. They had an answer for everything. They had paperwork. They had a unified front. They had spent years constructing this narrative, this justification for their greed. Any protest I made was just me being dramatic or ungrateful. I slowly, deliberately, tore the yellowed paper in half, then in half again, the ripping sound echoing the tearing of the last vestiges of my love and respect for them. I let the pieces fall to the floor like confetti at a funeral. "This is garbage," I said, my voice steady now, filled with a cold, clear certainty. "It's not legally binding, and you know it. A court would laugh you out of the building." My father's face darkened with rage. "You would take your own family to court? Over money?" "You're the ones who turned this into a business transaction," I retorted. "So let's treat it like one. No contract, no obligation. The list is denied. This investment is officially worthless." I turned, my decision made. I was leaving. I was done. Not just for Christmas, but forever. I walked towards the door, ignoring the chorus of angry shouts and my sister's theatrical wails. I just had to get out. "You can't just walk away from this, Annie," my father yelled after me. "There are consequences for breaking a deal." I didn't turn around. I didn't care what his consequences were. They couldn't force me to give them money I wasn't legally obligated to give. I reached the front door and put my hand on the knob. "If you walk out that door," my mother's voice called out, suddenly sharp and strong, cutting through the noise, "we're calling your client." I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "We're calling Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice laced with venomous sweetness. "You know, the famous actor. We have his personal number from that little thank you note he sent. I think he'd be very interested to hear all about the fraudulent business practices of his new favorite woodworker. I wonder what a story like that would do to your precious reputation." The threat hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at the heart of everything I had built. Mr. Sterling. He wasn't just a celebrity client. He was the client. He was a notoriously private, old-school actor who valued discretion and integrity above all else. His commission, a massive custom library for his estate, had been the project that put me on the map. The feature in the design magazine had hinged on his participation. His gushing testimonial was the bedrock of my newfound reputation. A call from my unhinged mother, babbling about fraudulent business practices and family debts, wouldn't just be embarrassing, it could be catastrophic. I turned around slowly, my hand falling from the doorknob. My mother was standing in the center of the room, her chin held high, a look of grim triumph on her face. The mask of the gentle, supportive matriarch had fallen away completely, revealing the cold, ruthless strategist beneath. This wasn't a spontaneous threat born of anger. It was a pre-planned kill shot, the final move in their disgusting game of chess. They had anticipated I would refuse, that I would call their bluff on the fake contract. This was their ace in the hole. You wouldn't, I said, but the words sounded weak, hollow even to my own ears. We both knew she would. She would burn my entire career to the ground to get her sunroom. Try me, she replied, her voice as cold as a winter morning. What's a little family drama to a man like that? He'd probably find it distasteful. Wonder what kind of person he's let into his home. A person who doesn't honor her agreements? A person who turns her back on her own family? Reputations are so fragile, Annie, especially new ones. My sister Clara was practically vibrating with glee. She's right, Annie. Think about the bad press. Celebrity craftsmen in bitter family feud over money. It's ugly. It makes you look cheap. No one wants to buy a $10,000 table from someone who's cheap. Every word was a calculated twist of the knife. They weren't just blackmailing me for money. They were attacking my character, my integrity, the very things I had poured into my work. My brand wasn't just about beautiful furniture. It was about authenticity, about honest craftsmanship. They were threatening to poison the well, to taint my name with their own greed. And what exactly would you tell him? I asked, forcing a calm I didn't feel. That I refused to pay out on a fraudulent document you tricked me into signing 8 years ago. That I won't give Aunt Carol $5,000 for her facelifts. What fraud have I committed? My father stepped forward, taking over. The fraud of misrepresentation. You presented yourself as a self-made success, but you're not. You were built on our investment, our money. By refusing to acknowledge that, you're lying to your clients. You're a fraud. We would simply be setting the record straight. I. The mental gymnastics were astounding. They had created a narrative so completely divorced from reality that they actually believed it. In their story, I was the villain, and they were the wronged investors fighting for what was rightfully theirs. They would tell this story to Mr. Sterling and to anyone else who would listen, with the absolute conviction of the righteous. And mud, once thrown, has a tendency to stick. I looked around the room. Not a single person looked ashamed. My cousin Jeremy was probably already mentally spending his $2,500. Uncle Robert was likely planning his next trip to the casino. They were all in on it, united in their entitlement. This wasn't just my parents' plan. It was a family conspiracy. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy resignation. I couldn't risk it. I had spent a decade sacrificing everything for my business, my social life, my relationships, my health. I had poured my blood, sweat, and literal tears into every piece of wood that passed through my workshop. I couldn't let them destroy it with a single phone call, with a volley of well-crafted lies. They had me, and they knew it. Fine, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. You win. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. The tension broke. Smiles returned to their faces. My mother's expression softened into one of magnanimous victory. "Oh, Annie, darling, I'm so glad you've seen reason," she said, as if she had just patiently guided a lost child back to the path. "We're only doing this for your own good, to teach you the importance of family." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice flat and dead. "Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. It's blackmail. It's extortion. But fine, you'll get your money." I looked at the crumpled list on the coffee table. $58,500. I'll make the transfers on New Year's Day. Clara clapped her hands together. "Oh, wonderful. I can go to the dealership tomorrow and put the deposit down." I ignored her. My gaze was fixed on my father. "But let's be very clear about the terms of this new arrangement, since we're now operating as a business, not a family." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "This is a one-time payment," I said, enunciating each word with precision. "Consider it me buying out your shares." This payment settles all past, present, and future claims you or anyone in this room thinks you have on my life or my business. After the transfer is complete, we are done. I want it in writing, a real contract, drawn up by my lawyer, stating that this payment absolves me of any further financial obligation to any of you forever. Every single one of you on that list will sign it." My father's smile tightened. This wasn't part of their plan. They envisioned a lifetime annuity, not a one-off payday. "And one more thing," I continued, my voice dropping. "When you sign, you will also be signing away any right to contact me, my clients, or my business associates ever again. You will not call me. You will not email me. You will not show up at my house or my workshop. If I see any of you, I will call the police and file a restraining order for harassment. This $50,500 isn't a dividend. It's the price of my freedom from you." The room was silent again, the celebratory mood evaporating. This was not the happy ending they had pictured. They were getting the money, but they were losing the asset. They were losing control. My father stared at me, his eyes hard. He was doing the math, weighing the immediate cash against the potential future earnings he could have squeezed out of me. After a long, tense moment, he gave a curt nod. "Fine, if that's how you want it. Your lawyer can send the papers to me." "He will," I said. I picked up my purse and my coat, my movements stiff and robotic. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look at any of them. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold night air. The warmth and cheer of the house behind me felt like a lie. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, my heart pounding. It was a screenshot of an old social media post from 8 years ago. It was a photo of me, younger and beaming, standing next to my brand new drum sander. My caption read, "I have the best parents in the world. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for the incredibly generous loan to help me get my business off the ground. I'll pay you back every cent and then some." Beneath the screenshot was a single line of text from my mother. "Just in case Mr. Sterling wants to see the fraud in writing, the price just went up to $75,000. For the emotional distress, new list will be emailed tomorrow." I stood in the freezing night, the glow of the phone screen illuminating my face, and I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel rage or betrayal or even sadness. What I felt was a strange, chilling clarity. It was the feeling of a general seeing the enemy's entire battle plan laid out before them. They were never going to stop. This wasn't about the $5,000. It wasn't about the list. It was about control. As long as I had something they wanted, they would find a way to take it. The contract, the blackmail, and now this. It was an endless cycle of escalation. Paying them wouldn't buy my freedom. It would just fund their next attack. My initial plan to have a lawyer draft an agreement was a fool's errand. They would sign it and then immediately find a loophole, a new piece of emotional leverage, another 8-year-old social media post they could twist into a weapon. They would bleed me dry, not just of money, but of my peace, my security, my sanity. I looked back at the house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, where my family was celebrating their victory, and I knew I couldn't just walk away. I had to burn the whole rotten structure to the ground. I got in my car, but instead of driving home, I drove to the one place that felt like a sanctuary, my workshop. The smell of cedar and sawdust greeted me like an old friend. I turned on the lights, illuminating the half-finished projects, the tools hanging in their perfect order, the tangible evidence of my real life's work. I sat on my workbench, pulled out my laptop, and started to type. I wasn't writing an email to my lawyer. I was writing an email to Mr. Sterling. My hands flew across the keyboard. I told him everything. I didn't hold back. I didn't soften the details to make myself look better. I told him about the years of dismissal and ridicule from my family, about the $5,000 gift, the fake contract, and the Christmas Eve shakedown. I attached a photo of the typed list of demands. I explained their threat to contact him, to slander my name and lie about my business practices. I told him I was mortified that he had been dragged into this, that his privacy had been weaponized against me. I ended the email by saying that I understood if this incident tainted his view of me and my work, and if he wished to sever our professional relationship, I would accept it without question. I was laying all my cards on the table. My mother wanted to use him as a weapon. Fine. I would disarm her by firing the weapon myself. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The moment it was gone, a wave of terror washed over me. I might have just professionally executed myself, but beneath the terror was a sliver of something else, Relief. I had taken back control. The outcome was no longer in my mother's hands. It was in mine. I couldn't sleep that night. I just sat in my workshop, the silence broken only by the hum of the heater. My phone remained silent. The next morning, Christmas Day, my mother's promised new list arrived in my inbox. The total was now $75,000, with new, even more ludicrous justifications. Clara's down payment had been upgraded to full purchase price. My father had added an extra $10,000 for management consultation fees. It was so grotesquely greedy it was almost comical. I deleted it without a reply. The silence lasted for 2 agonizing days. I ignored the barrage of texts and calls from my family, each one more demanding than the last. Then, on the morning of the 27th, an email landed in my inbox. The sender was Richard Sterling. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open. It was short, only a few lines. Annie, I received your email. I am appalled by what you are going through. Integrity is a rare commodity, and you have shown it in spades, both in your work and in your character. The situation with your family is their shame, not yours. Do not give them a single dime. My legal team is on retainer and at your disposal should you require them. I look forward to commissioning the pieces for my study next spring. Sincerely, Richard. Tears streamed down my face, hot and cleansing. It wasn't just the validation or the relief of not losing my biggest client. It was the simple, profound kindness of it. He saw the truth. He believed me. His response gave me the final piece of armor I needed. My phone buzzed again. It was my father. I finally answered. Have you seen your mother's emails? He barked, no preamble. The wire transfer instructions were sent an hour ago. We expect the funds by the end of the day. No, I said, my voice calm and steady. What do you mean, no? He sputtered. Don't play games, Annie. We know you got the list. 75,000. End of day. I mean, no, you're not getting the money. Not today. Not ever. There was a pause, then a low, dangerous laugh. Did you forget our conversation? Do I need to remind you about Mr. Sterling? Your mother has his number right here. She's itching to make the call. Go ahead, I said, and I could almost feel his shock through the phone. Call him. I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear from you. In fact, I already told him to expect your call. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could picture him, his face slack with confusion, trying to process what I'd just said. I told him everything, Dad, about the list, the fake contract, the blackmail. I sent him a copy of your demands. He knows you threatened to call him and lie about me, so please make the call. Validate my entire story for him. I dare you. I could hear my mother's frantic whispering in the background. What's she saying? What did she do? My father's voice, when it came back, was a choked whisper. You what? It's over, I said, and the finality in my own voice surprised me. Your leverage is gone. You have nothing. No fake contract, no imaginary debt, no reputation to ruin. All you have is a list of demands that now serves as evidence of attempted extortion. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Richard's lawyers are very good. He offered me their services, you know. That was it. The final fatal blow. The mention of actual high-powered lawyers turned their smug threats into a terrifying liability. The hunters had become the hunted. My father started to bluster, to threaten, but the power was gone from his voice. It was the desperate sound of a bully who had just been punched in the mouth. I didn't wait for him to finish. Goodbye, Dad, I said, and I hung up. I blocked his number, then my mother's, then Clara's. One by one, I scrubbed their names and numbers from my phone, a digital amputation. It was a quiet, simple act, but it felt like the most powerful thing I had ever done. The war was over. I had won. My prize wasn't just keeping my money. It was my life, a life free from their poison, free from their endless grasping need. The silence that followed was the sound of my own future beginning.